All right, so I want to answer some questions before I start. So first of all, if you look through this, any of them that are the quadrantals, any of them, you don't have to do anything but draw the x and the y axis. So the quadrantals would be 0 and 0 radians. It would be 90 degrees, which is pi over 2. It would be 180 degrees, which is pi. It would be 270, which is 3 pi over 2. And then it would be 360. So any problem on the green sheet or the pink sheet you have that is one of these, you just draw your x and y axis. So the first one is sine of 270. 270 is 3 pi over 2. So 270 is right here. The point right here on the unit circle, because the radius is 1, is 0 and negative 1. The cosine is your x value and the sine is your y value. This is asking for the sine of 270, which means it wants the y value at 270, which is negative 1. So your cosine at pi, right here, the point right here is negative 1, 0. Cosine is the x value here is negative 1. The tangent of pi over 2. So that's one of the quadrantals. That's right here. The quadrantal value here is 0 and a positive 1. Tangent is the sine of theta over the cosine of theta, which means I want the y value on top and the x value on bottom. So I put 1 over 0. Can I have a 0 on the denominator? So it's undefined. This took me 25 minutes yesterday, and I just did it in less than 2 minutes today. And you understand it. And you're going, oh my gosh, this is so easy. So the sine of 180 degrees. Here's 180 right here. I get negative 1, 0. The sine is the y value, which is 0. So then we get to the mind-blowing one, which was cosecant, that all of you were just freaking out about yesterday. If you look on your sheet from yesterday, cosecant is the inverse of which one? Okay, so this is negative pi over 2. So I'm right here. It's still a quadrantal, and even if I go the negative way, the point here is still 0, negative 1. The cosecant, I know, is 1 over the sine of theta. The sine of theta is the y value. The y value in this case is negative 1. So I get 1 over negative 1, which equals negative 1. Okay, does this clear up the quadrantals for you, first of all? Because then I'm going to clear up the rest of it for you. But I want to make sure you understand. Yes? Pardon? There's 6 of them. There's sine, and what's the inverse of sine? Cosecant. There's cosine, and the inverse of that is secant. And then there's tangent, and the inverse of that is cotangent. Okay? Okay. So on the green sheet that has the reference angles in front, I want you to go to the back, and I'm going to show you a trick how to do this so you can remember the rest of this. And so what I want you to do on the back here, first of all, I want you to write down the square root over 2. I want you to write on the back of the reference angle one, yes. And then what I want you to do is take your left hand and I want you to lay it down on the sheet of paper. So the left hand looks kind of like the first quadrant. And this is 0 and this is 90. Left hand, yes. And if you're left-handed in writing, I don't know what to tell you. You're sad. I really don't know what to tell you. You got to use your left hand, or it's not the first quadrant. So, okay. So that's 0 and 90. So if this is the first quadrant, this is 30 degrees, this is 45, and this is 60. And the next thing on your handy-dandy thing that you're going to label is label the radians. And I know 90 is pi over 2. And fill in the rest. So here's the trick. If I want to know the cosine of 30 degrees, I'm going to put my finger on 30 degrees, which is my first finger. Cosine is the number of fingers above. How many fingers above the one I have my finger on? 3. If I stick that in here, I get the square root of 3 over 2, which is the cosine value at 30. The sine value at 30 is below. How many fingers are below that finger? 1. What's the square root of 1? So it's 1/2. So the cosine is the square root of 3 over 2, and the sine is 1/2. At 45, if I want the cosine of 45, how many fingers above? Square root of 2 over 2. Sine is below. How many fingers? Square root of 2 over 2. 60 degrees. Cosine, how many fingers above? So 1/2. How many fingers below? Square root of 3 over 2. And the reason I'm showing you this is you're going to have to fill that in on a test. And so those of you that are sitting and staring at me and I'm not sure why we're not engaged, but whatever, you actually have to do this. And so here's a hint for you. If you don't want to do the little hand trick, that's okay. Memorize it if that works better for you. But I can tell you, even yesterday, at the very end, when we had the wrong number, I was sticking my hand up there and counting. That's what I was doing. I was trying to figure out because I still get confused sometimes, and I count and I look, and I'm like, oh, we're wrong. Okay? So on your test on Friday, there is a whole problem where you have to fill in the whole first quadrant, and it'll all be blank, and you'll have to do that. All right. So if we go back to the green worksheet now, this says the tangent of 30 degrees. So the tangent is the sine of 30 over the cosine of 30. So if I put my hand down, 30, the sine is the bottom, so that's 1/2. And the cosine is the top, which is the square root of 3 over 2. So you get the square root of 3 over 3. So the sine of 330, what's my reference angle for the sine of 330? Pi over 6, right? Because that's here, and it's 30 degrees away. And so pi over 6 is my 30 degrees. So my reference angle is pi over 6, or 30 degrees. So if I look, I want the sine of 30 degrees. The sine is below. What's the sine value? How many fingers? 1/2. So the sine here is 1/2. And in the fourth quadrant, the sign is the y value. Is the y positive or negative? It's negative, so it's a negative 1/2. So the cosine is 0. That's a quadrantal. It's right here. The point is 1, 0. The cosine is asking for the x value, so that's 1. The tangent of 135. So the tangent of 135 is here. So my reference angle is 45, or pi over 4. And what I want is the sine of 45 over the cosine of 45. So the sine over the cosine of 45, how many fingers above? 2. How many below? So it's square root of 2 over 2. Which leaves me 1. And in this quadrant, what's negative, x or y? X, so this is a negative value. Okay, how many of you are understanding this way better now? Okay, it's amazing what quiet and paying attention might do. So if you go to the reference angle worksheet, so if I'm given 60 and I need to fill in this one, and this one. So I know this is, it starts at 0 and it goes to 60, and over here would be 180, and this would be 360. And the reference angle is the distance back to the y-axis, the smallest or the acute angle back to the x-axis. So the first one is 60. So to get here from the x-axis, I'm going to take 180 minus the 60. So this is a subtraction, and this gives me 120. But to get from 180 to here, what am I going to do with the 60? I'm going to add it. So this one gives me 240. And to get from here to here, do I add or subtract now? I'm going to subtract this time. So it's 360 minus 60, which would give me 300. So if you do the 45, it's the same thing. This is 180 and this is 360. So to get to this one, you subtract 45. So it'd be 180 minus 45 would give me 135. This way, I'm going to add. 180 plus 45 gives me 225, yes? Am I adding right? Yes. And this one, I'm going to subtract. So 360 minus 45 gives me 335, I think. But what happens if it's in radians, like number 4? This one's wrong? What is it? 315, thank you. Okay. But what happens if this one's radians? Right. So 180 degrees, which is pi, how do I make that something over 4? 4 pi over 4, right? But what's the 2 pi side? 8 pi over 4. Very good. So this side, I'm subtracting. So 4 pi over 4 minus 1 pi over 4 gives me 3 pi over 4. And this way, I'm going to add. So 4 pi over 4 plus 1 pi over 4 gives me 5 pi's over 4. And this way, I subtract. 8 pi over 4 minus pi over 4 gives me 7 pi over 4. So you all do the 12 one. What's pi in 12s? Yeah. We're doing this one, baby. Okay. So this side is going to be 12 pi over 12. And this side is 24 pi over 12. So if I subtract 1, I get 11 pi over 12. And this side I get 13 pi over 12. And this side I get 23 pi over 12. Okay, any questions on finding the reference angles? No? Any questions on how to fill in the first quadrant? You can all do a little trick, except the people that are actually left-handed, and that's so sad. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. The pink worksheet that you picked up, that's what I'm taking a grade on. So you have the rest of the period to work on that. Make sure you see Friday as a test. Friday is a test. And we'll review on Thursday.